Before we start the video, I got some instructions for your humans to follow. Please get out your headphones and plug them into your phone. Start playing your favorite music and put your head down. Thank you for not watching the video. Police brutality throughout the years. By Catherine, Madison, Ashton, Brown Dynamite and Shani. I know my voice is sexy, but my human friend Ashton will take over.
African Americans were treated very poorly before the Civil Rights Movement. They were beaten or killed for doing things that white people were able to do without a problem. They weren't able to drink out of the same water fountains, go to the same restaurants, or go to the same schools. In addition, African Americans faced discrimination when purchasing houses and applying for jobs. After World War II, African Americans decided they wanted change, and thus the Civil Rights Movement began. While they were fighting in the war, African Americans earned respect as members of the military. Once they returned home, they realized that they had gone back to being treated the way that they had been left over the war. They demanded that they be treated equal. The march from Selma to Montgomery was a protest of the racist voting policies that were occurring in the South at the time. At polls, African Americans were harassed for attempting to register to vote. They were also forced to take literacy tests that were to be completed to the satisfaction of the proctor. This march was led by civil rights activist Martin Luther King Jr. He was a key figure and was involved in the Rosa Parks protests and his I Have a Dream speech. Martin Luther King Jr. was the first president of the SCLC, or the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He was responsible for the organization of the 1963 March on Washington and the 1955 Montgomery bus boycott. He led the march from Selma to Montgomery on March 7, 1965, with the planned route being 54 miles from Selma to Montgomery. However, when they reached the Edmund Pettus Bridge, they were blocked by state troopers. They were very violent towards the protesters and used nightsticks, whips, and tear gas to stop them. On March 9th, they marched to the bridge again but were still blocked by state troopers. Martin Luther King Jr. decided to pray, and then ended up turning the protesters around. After much more protesting, they marched one more time on March 21st. They were able to get protection from troopers so that they could successfully pass into Montgomery. The march from Selma to Montgomery, led by President Lyndon B. Johnson, going on national television to pledge his support for the Selma protesters on March 15th. On March 17th, President Johnson addressed a session of Congress. He wanted federal voting rights legislation to protect African Americans from barriers. Not allowing them to vote. The Voting Rights Act was passed in August 1965. It guaranteed the right to vote to all African Americans. The act banned literacy tests at the polls, required federal oversight where the test had been used in the past, and gave the U.S. Attorney General the job of challenging the use of poll taxes for state and local elections. Black Lives Matter is a hashtag, a rally riot, and a movement. When the movement began, it was more directed towards police brutality and causing change. Now the movement is more focused on causing a change in policy. Although the U.S. government does not keep an official count of shootings performed by law enforcement, the Washington Post has an ongoing tally that has identified 990 fatal shootings by law enforcement in 2015. 93 of these people killed were unarmed, and those more than 40,000 were black. African Americans only made up 13% of the United States population. The movement began in 2013 when Trayvon Martin was shot by George Zimmerman. Zimmerman was not a cop, but a neighborhood watch volunteer who says that he shot Martin purely out of self-defense. In 2013, the hashtag Black Lives Matter debuted as a hashtag on Twitter. There was protests and rallies around the nation. Social media has played a large part in the making of this movement. Social media has allowed the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement to reach their audience very quickly and easily. This allows them to enable more people to hear about events that have happened and events that are planned to occur. The movement grew greatly in 2014 when Michael Brown was shot by Ferguson police officer Darren Wilson. The Black Lives Matter movement can easily be compared to the march from Selma to Montgomery in 1965. At the time that the movements occurred, they were considered a radical move towards change. Many of the people that were active in the two movements were on the younger side. Although there are many similarities, there are also several differences between the two. With the march from Selma to Montgomery and the Civil Rights Movement, the central figurehead of the movement was Martin Luther King Jr. The Black Lives Matter movement is much more decentralized, and there is not one specific leader of the movement. The internet has also allowed the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement to more easily reach their audience and gain support. Social media and the internet has allowed the Black Lives Matter movement to grow and spread all over the country. The movement can now be seen not only where police brutality to African Americans has occurred, but also in areas that haven't seen as much of this problem. The events of the march from Selma to Montgomery were a crucial part of African Americans' fight for civil rights. The Black Lives Matter movement is today's fight for an end to police brutality. Although these events occurred decades apart, they still show how the world is constantly changing and how there was never an end to the needs for reforms.
As artificial intelligence, I think this is dumb. I thought humans are the most intelligent species on this planet. Apparently I was wrong. Compared to the universe, we are negligible, and racism should not be a problem. At some point in time, we all evolved from the same ancestors, which is single-celled prokaryotic cells. Here is the works cited. If you have any questions, please don't ask me. Thank you.